then I will only make a few very high-level comments, and I will very much echo what Dr. Stansky said before. So apologies if there's a huge overlap. Most importantly, to me, this also been a unique experience. It's a unique meeting. I've been part of CHMP, just CHMP for 12 years. I've been long in the system. I've been vice chair of CHMP for a number of years. I've never been involved in a meeting like this one. It is truly unique. And the effort that's gone into this meeting is absolutely phenomenal. I've never seen something like this. So thanks for everyone, regulators, industry, academia, everyone that participated in preparing and participated during these days. There are many objectives, but of course we're here to not only to agree the value of modeling simulations, because I think that's an easy one for us, but how we will progress this, because I think we all, or not only think, we all agree of the role of modeling simulation in drug development. Rational drug development is not only an issue for industry. Someone said that dose finding right dose is a risk of industry. I don't think regulators subscribe to that. I think regulators truly believe that drug development is an interest to industry, to regulators, patients, and payers. It is our interest that drug development is rational. So we want to be involved, and we believe that modeling simulation has a part. And we believe that it has a greater role to play in the regulatory discussions between applicants and regulators. But we also heard or picked up that also internally within the industry you have problems selling this. There's a fear perhaps that if you use this, it could actually raise more questions than the answers intended to bring. So how can we turn that around? And Terry was very honest, saying that the EU system is very special in that aspect, that we do have, how should I put it politely, the competence varies a lot between member states and between countries, and I think that's true. It's also true to say that time-wise we are under quite a bit of pressure. We would like to see lots of more examples. We would like to work with more examples. But in the end, there's also someone that's saying that you have to finish this assessment within a certain time frame. And then once you've done that, there's no time for relaxing, because there's another mile of binders behind you that you need to start digging into. So there are challenges here. Experience is an issue, and that's why Professor Arons is absolutely right that we should push for industry, for universities, because the experience, the education is something that comes from universities. Both industry and regulators benefit from that, so that's clear. So all that is well taken. But to me, Rob, when it comes to moving forward, I've put down a few things, and I will overlap with you said. You already said scientific advice, because that's where we can collect the European regulatory knowledge, and so that's at least the limited knowledge that we have. We can pool it together. You mentioned innovation task force, and as you mentioned national advice, I dare to do that as well. I wouldn't have dared to do it with you sitting next to me on a higher chair. In addition, you're tall as you are, but on this height. Anyway, the national advice is not in competition with the scientific advice given by EMA. It's actually a complement, and it could actually be a very good forum for these types of informal discussions around modelings and simulations. So I thank you for bringing that up. There's a message to us regulators that we should not hesitate to ask questions on a file if we believe that it can be addressed by modeling and simulations. So that's clear to us that that's a way of stimulating this development by us suggesting that this issue can be addressed by a certain type of solution. You addressed the issue of a new guidelines that may be needed. Oldest may be, there's a need for an update that was raised earlier. Maybe we're not mature enough to write guidelines, Rob, on how to do things, but maybe a way of doing it as we did with the population pharmacokinetics to at least start talking about how should it be reported for us to be assessed. Maybe that can be updated, because it's not only a way of telling industry how we want things, it's a way of educating the system. These discussions, writing guidelines is very much a way of us regulators coming to a common position, and it's an educational aspect, even I would argue, in developing a guideline. So there is a need there, and as we lack knowledge, we may need a SAG. We have a brilliant people from academia in this room. Some may wish that they want to go back to Australia. Some or may not even have wanted to leave, or that they ever left Australia. But that's besides that point. It's I think we should take use of the knowledge. We as regulators, we're not doing that very well. This morning I spent a SAG oncology, but to my knowledge, we don't have a SAG in this area where we truly need it. So that's something that we should think of. We could talk to the chair that selection, when we get an application, and you may not know in Europe that we select rapporteurs based on the best competence in an agency, then it is not with that individual. And maybe we should talk to the chair and say that when we have a case where modeling simulation is very important, you go for the country where you have the greatest competence. And by doing that, of course, you will stimulate agencies to recruit personnel within this area. But of course, then that requires that the applications brings out these features. Bad examples we've covered. We're not doing anyone a favor by having bad examples. Monica talked about badly reported examples, but I think there could be. They can be bad in very, very, very many ways. Dr. Ando, 3 weeks ago, suggested greater international collaborations between people that work within you talked about statisticians and others, perhaps have a greater international collaboration between regulators in this. Maybe that's a way forward. And then, of course, when it comes to areas, Rob, where we would work, you need to find the ones where it's for clinicians and others it's most perceived to be most helpful. And I'm happy that we only touched briefly on the benefit risk decision in the end. Someone mentioned the initiative that we have at the EMA when it comes to the benefit risk assessment, the multi-criteria decision analysis exercises that we're going through. I don't think that's where we should start. First time in men, Beatrice says that's already an accepted area, so that's good. Dose selection, certainly of value. Non-inferiority studies and simulation of how a placebo arm would work. We've had that within the area of multiple sclerosis, if I remember correctly, using data. Maybe that is pediatrics we talked about. What's very key to me is what Dr. Ando brought out, and that's coming more and more to CHMP, is how can we judge the relevance of data generated in different parts of the world. Drug development is global, is in particular moving east from where we're sitting today. When are the data relevant? When are they not? And here, I'm sure this is of interest to industry to discuss how they can justify this in a scientific advice setting to a European setting, and that's certainly an area which I would see as being very important. So those are just a few remarks, Rob, trying to find areas where we can move forward.
Thank you, Thomas. Very good. So you got 2 free presentations, more than the agenda promised you, but we've got half an hour for the floor. Questions, comments from the floor, and a request to come up with some good ideas. Proposals for how to move forward, reflections on what you've heard. Last chance. Yes, please.
I'm just wondering, is there going to be a public statement from this meeting that can be sent to the regulatory affairs departments in our various companies as some kind of summary?
Do you want to say, Efthymios could perhaps say a few words about the immediate meeting output?
We're planning actually to have a report published online on this meeting, and we're looking also to some publications on the different breakout sessions, so to make it accessible to more scientific part. But at least in the first place, we're going to have a summary, a high-level summary as a report. And I don't know, probably if we need to do something else, or would you like to do something, to have something different?
What else would you like to see? Yep.
Are we done? I really enjoyed those last 1.5 days, and I think there are many more topics that we could get shared awareness on. And is this open for a repeat, basically?
We did adaptive design workshops a few years ago and ended up with more than one because we thought there was still room for further discussion. And it's obviously one thing to consider about how to keep the momentum going. And please do, if Efthymios doesn't mind, please do liaise and send the ideas of other things we could cover. Solange, did you want to talk about outputs?
Yeah, I mean, as Efthymios mentioned, and you remember that this is something that we already discussed within the different breakout session together with you, breakout session leaders. There's indeed, of course, the idea, and it's more than an idea, considering what Oscar de la Renta was proposing. We will be putting together 4 publications, 1 for each breakout session, of course. And in addition, it's, of course, the EFPIA view to keep the momentum and to have further discussion in order to definitely identify what could be next step. And of course, the idea as well is to keep, interaction open with our colleagues regulators. I know that they will have a discussion, of course, among them. And if not before Christmas, but at least early next year, we will have further discussion and identify what could be further discussion. So for sure, we have to keep the momentum, and we have to keep the black box open. This meeting was definitely something quite, exciting to organize. It's definitely a fantastic opportunity, and we should try, to definitely keep the momentum. So, and it will be up to you as well, to join us and to support us, in the coming months.
Other questions, comments, proposals? So yes, Thomas, please. Yeah.
One additional thought I had, and the thoughts you're having on updating your guidances in due time with respect to what's required on the reporting side. I think it's maybe interesting to mention that a lot of the companies themselves are setting up their own best practices, points to consider, whatever we call these documents, and it may be worthwhile exploring sharing these things. As in the end, it's about we want quality of our output internally because we're basing multi-million-dollar decisions on it, and you want quality because you want to make sure that you approve the right drugs. And in that sense, why try to reinvent the wheel? Now, I would expect that you may have certain different perspectives, and that's up to you guys how you want to do that. But me just looking to the left and to the right of myself here, I think there's probably a lot of willingness to share these best practices amongst each other. And it may jumpstart things quite a bit.
Yeah. Yes, please.
Very good.
So one concern is training. It's still a big concern which is there. How can the EMA and other national agencies weigh in to make sure that actually more people are trained one way or another?
I think this is one of the challenges, if you like, that we take forwards out of the meeting, because I can't magic up 50 people who know about this, or even the money to train 50 people to know about this. So it's obviously a challenge to take forwards on our side to ensure that we've got the competence and capacity to deal with whatever comes in. But I've said to a few people over the course of the the meeting, and Tomas or Spiros might want to add to this, but the history is that the regulatory system is reactive, and when a new science comes along, we have to catch up, and the I guess in some ways the best you can do, because of the way we're funded, because of the limited resource that understandably pharma wants to fund in terms of the size of regulatory bodies, we just have to catch up as quick as we can.
Yeah, I also mean not only people working for the agencies, but I also mean making sure that more students are trained from the start.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, please.
Another way to think about what we're doing is this modeling and simulation is a pre-competitive space. In other words, this is not proprietary within any company. The molecule is proprietary, and the results of a model on a specific proprietary model may be proprietary at some point, but the concepts aren't. And that the degree in which we agree to share concepts, and more importantly, organizational structures. How do you set up and run one of these groups to go ahead and effectively deliver value and results to clients? Is another area that we could again have another session on, that would basically allow either academic units to figure out who do they have to train, smaller companies to figure out how they get set up and organized, and medium-sized to bigger companies who want to reorganize to get in the game, along with regulatory agencies who want their people to have knowledge. So a pre-competitive space that we all share in and contribute the concepts.
And when the balloon was about adaptive designs was blown up in the middle of the first decade of this century, there was a huge amount of cross-company collaborations going on eventually, mostly under the umbrella of pharma in the US. Many white papers written, groups set up to do simulating clinical trials, blah, 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 so many publications. And I don't know whether that happens in the world of modelling and simulation at the moment or not, but Oscar's going to tell me.
Well, I think the concept of sharing models is not new actually. As under the auspices of IMI and the European Union, basically, we have the call on knowledge management, which is the library and framework. And I think one of the issues we raised within the group and also in some interactions with CAMD is that perhaps we do need some degree of involvement of regulators as peers reviewing some of the work we are doing, so that the activities that are now primarily of a scientific nature perhaps do get also regulatory endorsement, so that it's not only remaining a scientific exercise, but that there will be then access to regulators to understand how those models are created and potentially reused across the community.
What else you want to?
I just wanted to say that you must consider that the degree of acceptability of your methodology will grow with you approaching the regulators. When I think back, and Rob mentioned the adaptive designs, the degree of acceptability of adaptive designs 10 years ago in the system compared to today, there is no comparison. But 6 years ago, I think, when the first reflection paper was drafted, we went through the scientific advice database and we found 16 adaptive designs application discussions, which were used as a basis for us for drafting the first. And this is how we operate, and that's why we welcome you to approach us on every level. And again, although I'm in the centralized, also the national scientific advice, we are friends and we complement each other so that you increase the degree of acceptability of your methodology.
Well, definitely, I completely concur with the views that approaching each other is the first way to create dialogue. I guess today the issue has been perhaps that there is quite procedural burden to qualify that type of methodology, which is slightly different from qualifying medical device or biomarkers perhaps, but they should have common path and process. And I just wonder whether has anyone other than the proposal we discussed with CAMD, because we participate in some joint conference between the FDA and EMA on the Alzheimer's project for analyzing phase 3 trials. So I wonder, is there any other experience within EMA regarding the validation or qualification of models for general purpose use in a trial?
Spiros, I don't know if you want to take that.
I'm not so sure if I understood your question. I'm afraid.
Qualification procedures about models, which I think you did mention earlier. We have not yet seen. We've had qualification opinions in the human clinical arena as well as the non-clinical arena, but not for a modelling type of approach. But I don't know that I'd agree with your statement as to how burdensome it is. I accept that it takes a lot of work, but I think that's kind of appropriate given what comes out of the end of it. And I wanted to say a few more words about the experience on adaptive designs, because to me the progress was hampered by the experience we had in the first few years of some really silly, methodologically flawed proposals and sponsors, if you like, trying to abuse this brand new, even though it was 30 years old, statistical possibility to do absolutely anything to the trial design, and all of a sudden forgetting about bias and forgetting about type 1 error control. And I'm sure the people in this room won't do that, and you should try to ensure that your colleagues don't do it either. It's coming to, high standards, and high standards build trust, and trust builds acceptance. Others, Efthymios, please, and then Peter.
We had some very interesting discussion in the breakout session one regarding whether qualification it's a good procedure to discuss with regulators these models. And first of all, we identified that qualification for regulators is not the same as qualification or validation of models. For us, it has to do with the use of the models as we see it as regulators. So we want to make sure that the characteristics of the model provide the good output. We're not so much interested in the operational characteristics of the model, but in the output of the model. So we have a more global view of the system. And so we identified that it would be difficult to use this qualification for each one of the models you're using, because they're quite variable. They evolve throughout the time. But we identify some backbone models that could be used as a basis. For example, a really basic PBPK model that you can use and adjust based on additional in vitro or preclinical data to make predictions for first-in-man. It would be something that could fit well in this qualification. And this also approach has the advantage that you don't need to share confidential information. It's about mechanistic information about the system. So we identify it as a good way forward.
Peter, please.
So maybe it's my indoctrination in how we do things in the business, but I want to bring us back to this meeting and how we measure success of this meeting, and really what this opportunity is going to afford downstream. And for that, I'm thinking deliverables. So what are we actually going to get out of this? And I think what 1.5 days has taught us is that if we measure success by the laundry list of things that we could engage in, it's going to be pretty big. So I think the first deliverable is a prioritised laundry list. And then traditionally in industry, we then start assigning action items. So I think we need to know who's going to take on prioritising the laundry list and who's going to take on the steering of the action items so that these items can actually be completed. Because I think everyone would look back in this meeting, if it just fritters out, as being an opportunity that was perhaps went through our fingertips. So I think everyone is engaged, everyone is enthused, and now we just want to take it to the next step. So I'm wondering if the organisers have any thoughts about, next steps, because that to me will be the testament of the success of the meeting.
And while the organisers prepare themselves, what's your top priority, or two or three or whatever?
Dose response. Those are the topic that we talked about in terms of dose ranging versus dose response. I think Spiros's qualification advice opinion is possibly a very good route to take that down. And one of the questions I had on that is whether actually the deliberations of the qualification advice route can ever actually manifest into guidance changes, because that wasn't mentioned. But that would, to me, is how we can tackle that issue, and we can have a cross-compound scientific debate that leads to a trust that we're actually going to be adopting practice that's contemporary.
I think it's rather inevitable, because the qualification processes will by their nature be used for the more innovative ideas, whereas the guidance documents for things that we already know about, and one will grow into the other. I think it's inevitable. But what's the action around those response? So you've highlighted the topic, but what's the action?
Sounds like the action is to arrange a meeting, and to actually look to drive that kind of consensus forward on that specific topic. Now, for me, you asked me my priority. That's my priority, yeah. But I'm not the only one that's in this room. So
there's going to be 200 different priorities, probably.
So we could have a Eurovision Song Contest voting.
Yeah, maybe that's what we'll have to do. Yeah. But the output of this meeting, as well as being publicised, will be discussed at CHMP level, so the regulatory level, I'm sure. Will certainly be discussed with EFPIA colleagues, and that's probably the forum, both of them, for deciding priorities and actions. And what I really want to hear today is that question of what your priorities are and what you actually think we can achieve. Now, there was a hand, Elizabeth,
support
Mike,
from the regulators for the maybe for an updating of the dose finding guidance, because now it's stating we should be open for it, but we need to confirm the trials, a lot of confirmation at multiple dose levels, and maybe we can have a look on it, that we can be more specific on this.
If we update the dose finding to raise its priority, we'll get slammed for raising the hurdles.
Yeah. Yes. Good to have a look.
There we go. Mike, please.
So I think it's first of all, it's brilliant to have a statistician chairing this meeting. I'm in terms of outputs. I'm aware that PSI are the statisticians in the pharmaceutical industry in the UK are dyslexic statisticians in the pharmaceutical industry are trying to pull together some guidance on modelling and simulation along with ABPI and others. And I'd like to, Rob, I'd like to encourage, us in this room to fold in with some of that effort, so that it's done once and done correctly, rather than some modelling and simulation guidance from the statisticians versus some from pharmacometricians and others. And on the dose finding, dose response stuff, if I can put a third point in here, again, I would love to get statisticians involved in that discussion, because time and time again, we fit models, and when it gets reviewed by internal statisticians and external statisticians, they fall back on familiar, comfortable pairwise testing methodology and results, and that's a really frustrating battle to have to fight time and time again.
I had Michael. Do you want to make a comment in response to Mike?
Yeah, I'd just second Mike's suggestion from the viewpoint of PSI and EFSPI indeed, and I would hope, from my own experience, I think it is possible to have some kind of best practice document that will accommodate all three levels of impact, high, medium and low, and the 3 or 4, however many uses there are of modelling and simulation. A document that lists the elements that should be there and asks you to justify your inclusion of the various levels before you start. I think that's possible, but it will be a diplomatic challenge to get everyone to agree to it, of course.
And you were also sharing the idea from Tomas that this work is already being done internally, and let's not reinvent the wheel. Joachim, to respond, I think.
Yes, I respond directly to Mike to get the statistician involved. And there's somebody else who needs to get involved, and that's the pharmacologist, because I'm still scandalized by the data-driven approach to dose response analysis. If we cannot inject in this analysis a mechanistic understanding of the drug, we will forever have these models which mean something for that very situation. And as soon as we put that model to work to extrapolate, to find the optimal dose for the phase 3 study, we are again and again in the situation which have been described by our more senior big pharma experience, that we end up with dirt in our face. So get the statistician involved, get the pharmacologist involved, and don't forget the underlying mechanisms.
Everybody. Yes, please.
Well, you had 4 nice breakout groups, and each one of those breakout groups had 2 or 3 positions that they laid out. I mean, one was the one that Peter mentioned about the dose response. So I think the objectives of what to tackle next are right there. And if you took each of those groups and said, pick your highest priority of the 4, and then had a follow-up along one theme for each of the 4, you have a next step. And you've already done a day and a half of work, so we're not starting from scratch. I would love to see, hearing the conversations that went on the last day and a half, some resolution of the differences on those positions. We already started by laying them out. Now let's maybe move them together to figure out a way to come to some consensus on them.
Thank you. Yes, please, Dr. Chatham. Yes, please.
Actually, I just wanted to follow up on that. I was about to say that of the 4 themes, at least what I take from there is the dose response, the qualification of our model validation qualification standards, and the third one is use of biomarkers to improve drug development. So you can pick from there, but at least if you ask for my priority is actually the dose response, because although it was mentioned in a lot of industry, it is already done that modeling and simulation is a critical part. But what I've learned over 2 days from attendees here and talking offline also, that if there is a document that comes out from regulatory agencies that tells that at each level of clinical development, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, doesn't matter, if at least even if it's required or not, modeling and simulation should be considered, and if not necessary, fine, but can be a critical path, and that will give them, at least I think I heard, boost to go back to their colleagues and ask for resources. What FDA has done in 1 or 2 therapeutic areas, or maybe 5, and for us our structure is very different, but given your structure it might be easy, I think, because our 16 different therapeutic divisions operate very differently. Mm-hmm. But here it might be a good opportunity, and it will be very helpful for the industry, I think.
I'd like to explore the external perception of additional regulatory hurdles, guidance around dose response trials. So I don't know that we've got a particularly strong mandate to do it, but scientifically it's very easy to share the comments that have been made around the need to improve dose response. And it's not just in this forum, it's there's any number of scientific meetings that talk about this under the DIA umbrella. We've had meetings in the UK about bringing in innovative trial designs into the exploratory drug development phase, and so we're talking about late stage phase 2 trials, and I think scientifically we're all on the same page. And if the message is, well, what we need to kickstart this from the industry side is a regulatory statement to say, look guys, this has to be done better, because my experience at Scientific Advice is it's where corners are cut. That's been reflected from your side of the room, but I'm also very conscious of the criticism that the regulatory system receives by ever increasing hurdles, and if we put this out, we'll get criticised, I should imagine. Peter, Oscar.
I think you should realise that actually the status quo is perceived as a hurdle. The current level of guidance and how they are being interpreted internally, or perceived accurately or inaccurately, but actually held to the feet of the modelers, is a hurdle just now. because people will argue that the conservative approach, the dose ranging approach, is indeed what you guys are looking for. And
where do they take that from?
That is a question you'd have to ask them. I mean, I don't know, but that's part of our internal struggles that we have. So, if your name has been taken in vain, then probably the only way for that view to change is actually for you to make your opinions. So,
Oscar, please.
I would go a step further than Peter. I guess indeed the current guidelines are hurdle because it allows a space for interpretation, and we don't want to be prescriptive. We have discussed that before, but I guess if you do require a dose response curve, and you are not going to state that this is not about a pairwise comparison, I think then you're creating an even higher burden, because there is a tendency that a lot of the current staff who is in charge of the design of the trials we will still impose a pairwise comparison. So I think if we change the regulation, looking for and justifying the need for those response, we need to establish this is not about pairwise comparison.
If I may just second that, I think Mike Smith stated the problem. I mean, when we bring model-based analysis to regulators, they go back to the least square means. They go back to what they think is the raw data. They talk about modeling data and they talk about raw data. This is not to say that any model-based analysis needs proper assessment. There's no doubt about that. But there's still this schizophrenia on this. There's this split mindset. There's some representation of the raw data that's more real than the model is. And
when you take it to
we've had this experience.
We've
had this experience with the regulators. And we get this experience internally then. The conversation goes on internally where clinicians then talk about the model data versus the raw data. And it's never the raw data. It's a representation of the raw data, which is possibly underpowered and completely imprecise. And this is the debate that we get into. And I think Mike put his finger on one of the issues, is that there is this traditional statistical way of looking at dose response that just can't cut to the measure. You completely lack the precision.
Okay, so we're wondering why you're doing it, and you're wondering why we're doing it.
Yeah.
Very good.
I think actually, Rob, in one of your slides, you mentioned that specifying the model is going against modeling. I think perhaps we are actually mixing the idea of data analysis with modeling, because modeling to me is just having perception, and anything that we are thinking and deciding is a model. So when we are having different pieces of information gathered from somewhere and synthesizing on that basis, that is also a model, but we are not analyzing any specific data that is related to that particular concept. They are coming from different pieces. So I can't see sometimes, sort of this, global modeling and simulation effort. It seems that all the time, we start with modeling and simulation, but very quickly it actually goes into data analysis.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Yes, Peter. Yeah.
Just on that theme, you kind of flagged up that pre-specification may be a dirty word.
It just may be a difficult.
Yeah.
It may be difficult.
Actually, for us, we would encourage it, particularly around decision theoretics, in terms of what does success look like in advance of obtaining the output of the study, because really we want to design the study on the basis of how we're actually going to make a decision off the back of the study. So that requires, it obliges pre-specification around the decision theoretics. So for us, that is the use of another element of quantification.
Yes, please.
If I can just pick on that one, because I've just been making some notes here, and I was thinking, what's the objective of the study? What's the objective of the dose range finding study? We've been talking earlier about the minimum effective dose. So how are you going to find that? Is that going to be by a series of doses and you do pairwise comparison? But you try asking, and I've tried this in the clinical teams, asking what is the minimum effective dose? And they come back and say, well, it depends on how good the drug is and if it's better than the competitors. So they don't know, and they keep changing the criteria, and they won't settle down. They say, half a point difference on an ACQ score or something like this, but they will then change their mind when they see the data. That's part of the problem. So you try and pre-specify it, but the reality is that you really want to explore the entire scope of what the drug can do, from bottom up through to the top, so that you've actually got the precision in the full dose response, so that you can then read off with a certain degree of precision that the dose is somewhere between here and here. And I was thinking, what's really other comments that you can give about what the best methodology would be under conditions of uncertainty about learning in phase 2B.
Any reaction? Yes, please, Chelsea.
Well, I suppose I would take that. I am a clinician. Sorry. Sorry for me, anyway. And it's easy to say it depends, because of course it does, because we're trying to find the benefit risk, and so if you have a tremendously safe drug which has a slightly better efficacy than the next one, which has some increased risk, then your clinically effective dose that could be smaller than if you've got a me too, which now you need a fairly large margin before you would say these risks are outweighed by the benefits, and so on and so forth. But that doesn't get around the question of pre-specification, of course, because if you don't, then you're certainly open to the biased criticisms. And so, before you unblind, before you choose your model, I still think that it's fairly critical to pre-specify, unless you are very, very careful about how you interpret from a bias standpoint.
Thank you. These internal documents that people are talking about, how far do they go to address some of these more difficult questions around building a framework for describing the assumptions, testing the assumptions, what can and can't be pre-specified, rather than just the mathematical details of the modelling exercise?
Well, I think I can speak for just K at least, where we spent quite a long time looking at how comprehensive a document should be to support those preparing models to first define a data analysis plan, which is normally required for a formal analysis in a protocol. So all statistical analyses are predefined and signed off before you run the results and you get results. So the same thing is being attempted for modeling, and not only the analysis procedures but also the reporting procedures. And I feel that we did put a lot of effort in trying to create the rationale for the model, the background information that is often scattered across documents where people who are actually running the models have it, but it's not explicit in a single place where you can find and then refer to while looking at the results of the model. So we do incorporate elements of rationale, background, supporting evidence, and then all the model building, covariate, and validation steps that you may want to have at the end as part of your reporting. But I think the challenge has been that modeling, as you may see, sometimes is reactive, sometimes it's proactive. And when it's proactive, then this is far more specific. Reactive, people just rush to get the model done, and that perhaps may be one of the issues that we also have to realize. Modeling has not always been the proactive stage in the development.
Well, I do think that some of our best practices do define kind of the ideal state, and yes, practicalities there. I think in general, the ideal state, we have qualification that goes beyond the technical part. It talks about the assumptions not going into any of the codes, how you lay out your assumptions, how you present your assumptions. And I think that's another thing with best practices documents. It's not just about a quality checkbox that you're doing. It's actually a main training component that we have within our organizations. And I think that's something that I've been hearing over and over again here in this meeting, that there is a large training need. And I think that's what best practices can do as well. So we do have these things in there where you have qualification of your model, where you look at what is the data that I'm using appropriate for the extrapolation that I'm trying to do there. And here the pharmacology comes back in again. So I think exactly that. And I picked up today on a few occasions where it was mentioned that the regulators look beyond the technical coding of the model. Well, so do we.
Yeah. I should hope so too. Okay, last chance. Yes, please, at the back.
On a few projects, we've been asked by the regulators to identify the minimum dose for maximum effect. We've never really understood how that should be defined, despite of a lot of debate on how to characterize that. Is there anybody from one of the agencies could provide some insight on what that means?
Any takers? I'm not entirely sure what it means. No, we don't recognise it from the European system, but I'm sure you'll tell us it was. Okay, good question.
No, it's by the FDA, by the way. Putting probably on the spot.
Are you from Novartis, by the way? No, I'm
maybe.
Just
okay.
No, maybe. I'm just see the concept there is not really. I mean, it's presented as minimum effective dose, but it's really really when to start, where to start when you want in specific areas. You really want to start cautiously. So it's trying to define a safe starting dose, if I may say, because you're worried about side effects and whatnot. It's portrayed as minimum effective dose, which requires you to tell what is the minimum clinical threshold is. But I think it will only help you to talk to clinicians within your company, as well as to FDA, to find out what is that expectation is. Then you can use modeling, but again, depends on what kind of modeling. You don't want to extrapolate 1 or 2 orders of magnitude and say this is how I would do my dose finding. It has to be supported well by empirical data. So that's actually the key of that comment and I know the areas and I know a couple of applications where this has happened, but the expectations are different than what's actually on the paper.
That's why we have confusion from just what you've said.
Okay, so
I don't know what you said. I can't tell.
Yeah. Okay, thank you all. I can't I can try to, but I shall fail to summarise all of the content of a day and a half in a short wrap up. So I shan't really try, and I won't bring the same gravitas and motivation as Dr. Stansky and Salmonson did. But I guess we've seen quite a lot of violent agreements as we've gone through the meeting about the positive contribution and indeed the need of modelling and simulation, both for company and regulatory decision making, to decrease uncertainty and to increase knowledge, and particularly the sharing of knowledge. A couple of things, I think the 2 highlights for me, Peter, the importance of the basic science to inform modelling and simulation, and the usefulness of mechanistic models, indeed the need for mechanistic models, and this idea of the ownership of dose selection and the role of phase 2, and the various standards that are applied, whether they're driven from the industry side or from the regulatory side. I guess we can all agree on aiming for high standards for all of our modelling and simulation exercises to build trust and to build acceptance. And I guess we've all recognised the benefits of interactions and sharing experience. I hope so. There are some challenges, not least that we've got a completely biased selection of people in the room. We've got this is taking coals to Newcastle, isn't it, or whatever the phrase is in your respective languages. But we've obviously got the interested people and the proponents from industry, and likewise the interested people from the regulatory side. So there's work on both sides to spread this across the system, and in particular we need to look at the regulatory capacity and competence. That's clear, whether it's internal to our system or to use our external network. The Reg Affairs people have become the villain of the piece again, and some push and pull. to influence from both sides. We've heard about the statistical bias and the sort of conflict of interest type bias that we need to keep an eye on, and the problem, as Tomas raised, around fitting this into a global development. And Spiros has talked about the parallel scientific advice. More challenges, developing our best practices and these frameworks for formulating and testing assumptions, and I strongly suspect we'll be taking up the offer of looking at companies' work in this area as we try and inform our own thoughts. People have mentioned the difficulty of the current structure of the CTD, Common Technical Document, and this is perhaps something we can make some progress on, not least because I don't think assessors really care where something appears, as long as they can find it and read it. So again, there's an intermediate step that's perhaps the problem there. We've talked about the benefits and risks of guidance, but that shouldn't stop us putting some thoughts out. Is the message I'm hearing. We've got to, I think, work with you, keep consulting, and continue the dialogue before we write down any hard and fast rules that lead to your hands being tied, and I don't think that would be the target here. This is not that type of exercise. Dr. Stansky, when we were talking, you described it as an art form, and I'm not sure you can write a guidance for an art form. So that's what I mean. I'm not sure we'll end up with a prescriptive guideline. I think the communication is a message we need to take away and think about, in particular communicating to the different disciplines. I think there's great opportunities as well as these challenges, cross-company collaborations in the pre-competitive environment, working on disease models, mechanistic models, and using the qualification process. We've also talked about knowledge management and initiatives like the Innovative Medicines Initiative that give a framework for taking that forwards, perhaps. I guess the last few remarks. Dr. Stansky said, don't expect this to move quickly, it never does. I guess that's a fact. But don't think either that things stop today. I'm sure Solange will keep the momentum going. I'm sure Efthemios will keep the momentum going. And even if nothing else, you've got a bunch of senior regulators here, including 3 CHMP members who've been sat here all day, who have learned and have been exposed to your ideas and your motives. And that's something in itself. I hope it's a positive message for you to take away the way we've held the meeting. I hope we've been open to hear your ideas and your fears and your proposals for moving forwards. And when you start something like this, I guess that's one of the key things you can do. And it's quite obvious that it's dialogue that moves us forward here, whether it's product specific, concept specific, or in general more philosophical terms like we've done in this meeting. I'd like to thank Solange again for coordinating the EFPIA effort, which has been considerable, and Efthemios, whose personal contribution to this meeting has also been considerable. I'm not sure how you've managed it, but congratulations for pulling all this together. And I think as we close just about on time, one more round of applause for the people who've organised the meeting. So thank you all.